The atonement theory of St. Anselm of Canterbury is really interesting, but I think ultimately it's flawed. So let me unpack that. His theory is called satisfaction theory, and it has taken a little bit of a grip on modern theology in a subtle way, but for the most part it's not really spoken about a whole lot these days. To understand what he's talking about, we have to go back in time to his era, which is right in the middle of the Middle Ages, around about the year 1000 to 1100. So St. Anselm was a product of his culture and his context and his times. The primary theological issue that needed to be solved with the gospel wasn't so much sin, but it was dishonour. It was offence. And the way this worked was that the offence was graded not according to what you did or how bad it was, but it was graded according to the honour and the rank and the status of the person whom you offended or whom you sinned against or whom you dishonoured. So it was the days of chivalry and knights and honour. So if somebody was walking down the street and they splashed mud on your wife's nice new boots, then you had to meet them at dawn the next day for a duel to the death, not because the boots are a big deal, but because they had offended your wife who carried your name and your family's legacy, and your honour was now at stake. So that was the day and age in which Anselm lived, was the whole currency of honour was profound. Similarly, if you're walking down the street and you throw an apple core over your shoulder and it hits a little street kid on the head, that doesn't really matter so much. You maybe apologise or you laugh, but it doesn't really matter. Why? Because the street kid has very, very low rank. If you're walking down the street and you absent-mindedly throw an apple core over your head and it hits the Queen on the head, then that's an altogether different story. Not so much because she got concussion or was actually hurting anyway, but no, it's because the rank of the Queen is so superior, so high, that your sin, your disregard was against the Queen, whose honour is inestimable, and so you will be punished accordingly. Okay, so let's translate that onto the gospel, which is what Anselm did. The King, who is God, is worthy of infinite and eternal honour. Why? Because God is an infinite and eternal King. Problem is that we, the common villagers, we've all offended our King. We haven't lived up to our calling. And so therefore we are guilty of an infinite and eternal offence, which we cannot pay, we cannot make up for it, we cannot appropriately honour the King because we've all dishonoured the King already. So we have a problem. So in steps the Prince, who is Jesus. The Prince comes and lives amongst the common villagers such as us and realises, yes, the villagers have offended the King and the King is of infinite honour. So we have a problem that needs to be solved. So the Prince offers himself as the tribute, as the offering of highest and greatest honour, to esteem God, to honour God in the most appropriate way. And because that involves the actual self-giving, the fullness of the life of the Prince being given unto the King, God, then the King is ultimately satisfied. And so it's called the satisfaction theory. So the death of the Son satisfies the honour of the Father. And we, the common villagers, can identify ourselves with the great Prince and be brought into that tribute of honour. And so we receive the Father's clemency. We receive the King's favour, not the King's judgment. So that's the general idea. That there's this inestimable offence against God because he's eternal and infinite. The Son, the Prince, solves the problem. We benefit. The King is satisfied. It's the satisfaction theory. So it's interesting, but I think there's three main problems with it. There's probably several more, but I'll give you the top three in my mind. The first one is that it means that the Prince is protecting us from the King. So you have a schism within the Godhead. That the God the Son is protecting us, the people, the world, from the harsh judgment of God the Father. This eternal and infinite judgment, because he is an eternal and infinite God. So we have this collision between the Father and the Son. The Son is protecting us from the Father. So they're working in opposite directions, not together as one true God. So we have a problem in a Trinitarian theology there. The second problem is that it completely does away with any notion of justice. Scripture teaches us that the punishment of a sin will be in proportion to the degree of harm that is done. That's just how justice works in the Bible. If it's a small offense, there will be some justice. If it's a very deep offense, there will be much more justice. So there is this sense of an increasing amount of justice according to the increasing amount of wickedness. Well, that doesn't work with Anselm, because even if we have accidentally dishonoured the king, we're still guilty of an infinite and eternal offence, which is an unimaginable consequence of our dishonour. So it really undermines the whole notion of justice. And the third one, which is another serious one, but this one has actually really influenced modern theology in an interesting way, Protestant theology, is that the whole notion that an offence against the infinite and eternal God is worthy of an infinite and eternal punishment. Therefore, the modern vision of hell being infinite and eternal, no matter what we've done, if we're not born again, everyone gets the same just deserts, which is infinite and eternal conscious torment. Awful. Because God's an infinite and eternal God. And so those two things are correlated, which in a sense might sound logical, especially in the world in which Anselm lived, but it's actually not a biblical concept. Nowhere in Scripture are we given the notion that an offence against God, even although God is infinite and eternal, is immediately worthy of an infinite and eternal punishment. That's just not a scriptural concept, and yet it has been dressed up to be dogma. But it's unscriptural, and I don't think it helps the conversation one bit. In fact, I think it works against proper theological logic. So, the satisfaction theory, as proposed by St. Anselm of Canterbury, like I said, is interesting. It is a fascinating reflection of his times and his days and the culture in which he lived, but ultimately I really don't think that it properly serves the church in explaining to us the holy transaction between humanity and God and humanity that met in Jesus on the cross. I think Anselm misses the mark on this one. So, I'll leave that one with you. You can ponder it, look into it a bit further if you want, and hopefully it's nice food for thought. So until next time, peace.